Welcome to Rise Up Voices from the Frontlines, your window into relationships, identity, safety, emotional awareness, regulation and intelligence, unleashed potential, passion and purpose.
Are your words architecture or ammunition? Welcome back to Rise Up Voices from the Frontlines, and this is a trauma-informed leadership series episode. I'm your host, Krista Fee, and today we're going to talk about one of the most underestimated tools in leadership, language. Words build systems. They're literally foundational architecture, but words can also be ammunition. They can harden people into silence, fracture teams into factions, and dim the light of trust. When we talk about safe havens, we're not talking about the absence of storms. We're talking about the structures that hold steady through them and the beams and bricks of those structures. They're built out of language, justice, and repair. Safety is enacted first and most powerfully through words, through language that builds safety. You belong here builds trust. You always mess this up erodes it. This behavior caused this impact opens the door for repair. You are a problem slams it shut. The nervous system listens to language. It registers tone, cadence, and meaning long before the conscious mind kicks in. A steady leader can speak hard truths in a calm tone and regulate a room, where an anxious leader can say neutral words with tension in their voice and escalate fear instantly. Leaders who want to create safety must become fluent in this truth. Words are nervous system interventions. And I want to talk about the us versus them trap. This is one of the most seductive but tremendously destructive uses of language. The us versus them frame feels clarifying. It feels galvanizing. It gives people a sense of belonging. We're the good ones. But it narrows the field until curiosity dies and accuracy dissolves into loyalty. Inside organizations, you see this as departments caricaturing each other, operations blaming sales, executives dismissing frontline concerns, communities labeled as obstacles instead of partners. In politics and media, the rhetoric gets even uglier. Whole groups of people are painted as villains, outsiders, or threats. The logic is the same. Once people are sorted into moral camps, dehumanization can begin. A lighthouse doesn't shine brighter on one ship than another. It shines impartially, offering orientation to all. Leaders must resist the self-satisfaction of the us versus them frame and return to humanization. Let me tell you about a military unit that broke that us versus them cycle. I worked with a military unit split down the middle. Enlisted members complained that officers were detached and arrogant. Officers complained that enlisted members were lazy and insubordinate. The us versus them dynamic was eating them alive. In debriefs, I introduced a rule. Describe behaviors, not identities. Instead of officers don't care, try when mission updates are withheld, we feel expendable. Instead of enlisted don't follow orders, try when checklists aren't completed, missions get delayed. At first, it felt forced, but slowly the conversation shifted. Behaviors could be addressed. Identities couldn't. The unit didn't suddenly become conflict-free, but the contempt dissolved enough for cooperation to return. The lighthouse shone on both ships, not just one. People are not problems. Behaviors are. Trauma-informed leadership insists on separating identity from action. When leaders collapse a person into their worst act, you are incompetent, you are toxic, you are the problem, shame takes root, and shame drives secrecy, retaliation, and disengagement. But when leaders address behaviors, this choice caused this outcome, this action has this impact, accountability becomes possible without humiliation. Dignity stays intact. This isn't just theory. Restorative justice models in schools and prisons have shown this for decades. When harm is discussed at the level of behavior, repair is possible. When harm is framed as identity, defensiveness hardens and the cycle repeats. The slope towards dehumanization. Unchecked, the us versus them frame slides into dehumanization. It rarely starts with slurs. It starts with sarcasm. Those people, the dead weight, low performers. It starts with contempt disguised as humor. Dehumanization is never neutral. It's the precondition for atrocity. The Holocaust began not with gas chambers, but with words. Jews were described as vermin and parasites. Once people were framed as pests, extermination could be justified as hygiene. The Rwandan genocide was fueled by radio broadcasts calling Tutsi people cockroaches. Once that language saturated daily life, neighbors picked up machetes against neighbors that they'd lived with for years. American slavery was upheld by pseudoscientific lies that Black people were subhuman, incapable of feeling pain, or morally inferior. Japanese American internment during World War II was justified by portraying citizens as enemy aliens. Stripped of humanity, families were caged without due process. Every atrocity has a linguistic prelude. Words laid the groundwork. Leaders sanctioned those words, and when the lighthouse dimmed, storms consumed millions. And today we can hear the dangerous echoes in rhetoric that frames entire communities as animals or invasions, in language that describes fellow citizens as enemies rather than neighbors. Social neuroscience confirms the danger. When people are dehumanized, empathy circuits in the brain literally go dark. Ordinary people who would never imagine themselves violent become capable of cruelty. This is why trauma-informed leadership insists on humanization at every level, because the line between contemptuous sarcasm and catastrophic violence is thinner than we like to admit. And leaders who fail to resist dehumanization don't just dim their own lighthouse, they risk pulling entire systems into darkness. Humanization, justice, and true safety. Let's talk about justice, because safety is not sentimental. To humanize does not mean to excuse. True safety requires fair, structured accountability. Without it, followers don't know whether standards matter, whether rules are applied equally, or whether justice even exists. A lighthouse without a foundation is just a tower waiting to fall. A leader without consistent justice cannot provide true safety. And justice equals predictable consequences distributed without prejudice or malice. Do the crime, do the time. A school that restored justice. I consulted for a school where discipline was wildly inconsistent. Some students were suspended for minor infractions. Others were let off for serious violations, if their parents had influence. Teachers felt powerless. Students felt unsafe. We implemented a restorative discipline model. Clear expectations, equal application, structured opportunities for repair. Teachers were trained to name behaviors and impacts instead of labeling identities. Students were invited into conversations about how to make things right. The change was dramatic. Trust increased. Conflict didn't disappear, but when harm happened, everyone knew the process would be fair. Students who had once disengaged began re-engaging. Teachers reported feeling supported instead of abandoned. And justice became the foundation. And with justice, safety grew. Consequences, fairness, and the problem of nuance. Here's the tension. Leaders pride themselves on discretion. Case-by-case discernment feels wise, but too much discretion creates inconsistency, and inconsistency erodes trust. Trauma survivors are especially sensitive to this. They notice tone shifts, they track exceptions, they see when rules bend for one person but not for another. And when they do, they conclude that safety is conditional, not real. So how do we preserve nuance without losing fairness? We anchor every decision in principles, not preferences. We communicate why exceptions are made and how they align with values. We submit discretionary choices to review, reducing bias and isolation. We hold frequent consistency, transparency, and dignity reviews, and they are non-negotiable. And here's the additional piece. Leaders must be accountable for outcomes, not just intentions. If discretion results in damage, if trust erodes, if harm spreads, leaders can't hide behind "I meant well." Trauma-informed systems measure by impact. Leaders must own the fallout of their discretionary calls, repair the damage where possible, and adjust the process to prevent repetition. This accountability turns discretion into a learning practice, not a loophole. Without it, discretion becomes a shield for favoritism and recklessness. With it, discretion becomes a tool for justice tethered to outcomes. Learning to repair. The quiet courage of safety. Even the best leaders will fail. Systems will falter. Words will wound. That is inevitable. The real test of safety is not whether harm happens, it's whether repair happens. Repair is courage. It's saying, I was wrong and here's what I'll do differently. Here's how I'll make it right. Neuroscience shows that repair restores trust faster than perfection ever could. In relationships, quick apologies predict long-term stability. In organizations, prompt corrections prevent cracks from widening into collapse. But leaders who refuse to repair, who double down, deflect, or defend, become brittle, and brittle lighthouses break. I worked with a nonprofit leader who had mishandled layoffs. Communication was poor, trust was shattered. At first, she got defensive. We did what we had to do, but the staff was crumbling under resentment. Finally, she gathered the team and said, I mishandled this. I failed to communicate clearly. And here's what I'll do differently next time. Here's how I will keep you informed. It didn't erase the pain, but it reopened the possibility of trust. Staff who'd considered leaving stayed. The organization stabilized. Accountability, ownership, and repair made her credible. And let me be honest, I've had to practice this myself. I've failed. I've said words that hurt. I've reacted out of my own trauma scars. But I've also learned this. Repair restores safety faster than denial ever could. My credibility as a leader doesn't come from pretending I never falter. It comes from repairing quickly, transparently, and with dignity. As someone who grew up in unsafe systems, discarded as the throwaway daughter of a trafficking victim, silenced by abuse, controlled by domestic violence, I know how much it costs when leaders refuse repair. Silence becomes the scar. Blame becomes the wound. That's why I choose differently now, because my scars remind me that repair is not optional. Repair is survivable. So here are some practical anchors that you can use to increase your leadership language. Justice and repair, if you want to lead as a lighthouse. Audit your language. Do your words humanize or dehumanize? Do they address behavior or attack identity? Resist us versus them. Check yourself. If it feels clarifying, it might also be narrowing. Return to shared humanity. Embed justice. Apply rules consistently and anchor decisions in principles. Communicate expectations clearly. Normalize repair. Make apologies a regular practice. Reward transparency. Model the courage to own mistakes. And protect dignity always, even in conflict, especially in conflict. So here are a few questions you can ask when you're ready for deeper self-reflection. How do my words build or erode safety in my system? Where have I allowed us versus them language to sneak in? Am I anchoring justice in principles or preferences? When was the last time I made repair, and what happened afterwards? And who in my circle needs me to protect their dignity today? Lighthouses are not built of stone alone. They're built of words, justice, and repair. Language is architecture. Justice is foundation. Repair is courage. Together, they make systems safe enough to weather storms. Unsafe systems fracture. Safe systems don't erase conflict, but they hold steady through it. And when leaders choose to humanize, to apply justice consistently, and to repair quickly, they don't just manage crisis. They transform it into trust. Thank you for joining me on Rise Up Voices from the Frontlines, and this is a Trauma-Informed Leadership Series episode. Please share this episode with someone who needs to be reminded that words matter, justice matters, and repair is the real proof of strength. Because the storms aren't ending, but the lighthouse will stand the test of time and tides. Join us in the Rise Up Trauma-Informed Leadership course and community, or have us come bring a custom training, keynote, or presentation to your organization, event, or conference. Please feel free to use the link in the show notes to schedule a free consultation with me and rise up out of the ashes of your experiences and live and lead your life on fire.
Become a Rise Up Hero sponsor to provide mental wellness and crisis response resources for those who serve country and community. Join us in the Rise Up movement today.